In our work that we do in Green Nudge, we do a lot of activities that were very ground up, coastal cleanups, workshops, and I think it started to make me feel like, hey, how come most of our attendants are actually female? A lot of them will be happy to come on their own, or they'll bring along their family members, or they'll bring along their boyfriends or their husbands to come along as well. And it just got me interested to understand from our experience that the majority of participants that we work with, that we're engaging on social media, tends to be female. And I think that was also where we found that, hey, if that's the case, then how can we actually do more to encourage the guys?
My name is Aidan and I'm from Zero Waste Singapore, and I have with me three very special guests today. Seng from Green Nudge, as well as Kristian and Aidan from SG Climate Rally. And today we're going to talk about whether there are enough men in the sustainability space and what we can do to further engage people of different demographics. Before we get into it proper, we just want to have a few disclaimers. What we say today definitely is not representative of the opinions of the entire gender population, that's for sure, or any other types of gender identities. A lot of our experiences probably come from personal experience in the NGO scene, in the activism scene, or maybe through our work. More importantly, why we're talking about this today is we also want to use this topic to discuss how then we can better engage other types of demographics to move the needle on climate change messaging as well as actions. Unfortunately, my NGO and my team is made of 100% females. When we do call outs for volunteers as well as our activities, interestingly, we noticed that more than half of the responses that we get are actually from females. So also when we do outreach on social media, a huge portion of our audience or people who are more actively commenting or liking are also females.
I was talking to the publicity team to pull out some stats, and so the reach is equal, but actually in terms of engagement, then you get a big disparity. There's still a lot more female engagement across the different age groups or so. I think it does support the hypothesis. When it comes to the mobilizing or the actual engaging, that work, which I think fundamentally is a bit more emotional or requires this kind of practicing of empathy or compassion, is still something that is not socialized into a lot of men, right? This idea that you have to care for something enough to then mobilize or do something to practice change towards trying to affect change and change that.
I think also when Climate Rally first started up, it was also quite even in terms of a gender perspective. And I wonder if age plays a role here as well. Is it less of a stereotype for younger men to be involved in environmental issues as compared to older men? Something that I'm not 100% sure about, but I do think that the age dimension is interesting to think about.
It's not necessarily that we are seeing a lack of male voices or lack of male identifying people across the spectrum, but rather that they seem to populate very specific positions, which is also I think something worth challenging or thinking about. The on-the-ground work to mobilize or do the tough conversations of talking to your parents about these things end up, I think, being done a lot of times, not necessarily by the men who are then leaders, right? Those are the people who are very public-facing, the administrative roles. I think also just end up perpetuating very specific kinds of gender inequality in terms of how positions of power and where these people also make the decisions for companies and for our countries are only men. And I think those are ideas that we need to recognize and start maybe challenging a bit more in terms of who actually is on the front line and who are the people who are making decisions, and can we change that dynamic a bit.
I think for a long time, environmentalism was associated with animal rights. And so one part of that tied into diet, right, and vegetarianism. When I was growing up, there's a very strong idea that you need protein and meat to be strong. And so when I switched to a vegetarian diet, I got a lot of pushback from my close male friends. And it was really difficult to have these conversations and be part of these spaces when they were just hey, are you feeling strong today or not, bro? You got enough energy today or not, bro? You want more vegetables I get for you? Which was just very frustrating. And so the responsibility number one is for males to ally with other males who are trying to break into the scene and say, hey, these things, are things I care about. I really care about the oceans. I cry about environmental disasters and I don't eat meat. These sort of normalizing conversations are things that I think have traditionally been less pushed by men. Although that is starting to change. And I think also, in some broader senses, there is a bit of shame associated with talking about these issues with male friends. And so I do think that it's also on men to step up and be confident or be able to have these sort of conversations with other men. Personally, I feel that the notion of masculinity is changing quite quickly. What it means to be a man is changing in terms of perception and what people are feeling comfortable with. And there are greater definitions along with that. Aligning yourself with the environment is becoming, I think, part of what is acceptable in terms of masculine space.
In order for this to change, we probably have to make it less awkward or make it more communal to get people to come on board, or to kind of really just change the whole perception and say that actually there's nothing fundamentally wrong about pursuing this as your own personal lifestyle.
I think it's very important for us to start working towards breaking down the idea of what a man is. The phrase "be a man" is very toxic and it's actually used in a lot of ways by men to police other men. So I think we need to break away from this identity.
I think it is definitely like a structural thing for sure, and there are things that need to be done that will hopefully change as more and more people see healthier performances of masculinity. But I think it's also worth thinking about like more immediate steps, right? How do we engage more men? What about men right now needs to change, or what can men change about themselves in terms of like participating in these spaces?
And I think for men in this call, one thing that's come up a lot is being honest, expressing grief about the climate crisis or any other sort of environmental disaster, or even just small scale things like it really sucks that we have so much plastic waste. Grief is an emotion that we don't express enough in Singapore in general, particularly at least for the males that I know, we've been socialized not to express grief well. And so it makes it difficult to feel like we're caring about the same thing because I don't see, my friend being sad about it. So why, these feelings don't feel validated or recognized in the community. I think the second one is affection and love. There is a strong socialization against expressing affection for spaces, especially among men. And that ties into the environment because if you can't say you love a space, how can you explain why you want to protect it? Opening up that pathway to express both affection and grief, where I think actually could be really beneficial, both for us as men in the movement, but also to encourage other people to say, hey, I feel the same way and I feel the same things and I would like to get involved.
I just want to say that I think it's okay for us to just express out the thoughts itself. For people would probably also to start stepping out in the sense of being a bit of a role model and sharing others that actually it is also okay that because in practice someone is already doing it, and therefore you can have someone who could look out towards or even just mirror some of the actions as well. If you want to engage more guys or even the younger guys as well, it's really about just stepping out and being that role model and just being willing to be a bit more vulnerable, be a bit more authentic as well, and just be ourselves in that sense.
So just now when Aidan was saying that men should stop policing other men, actually it's not just men doing that. Women might also be socialized. I see that sometimes we speak in a way that might further entrench it, or like we might also be succumbing ourselves to certain stereotypes and certain socialized notions of what men and women should be. Actually, a lot of the people holding very educated positions like teachers and all that, sometimes in military, the types of words that are being used is also a lot of the entertainment type of shows that we watch. It's for fun, but a lot of it actually subconsciously further entrenches a lot of the notions that we are actually facing today. A lot of it boils down to marketing. Aidan was talking about switching to vegetarian. It reminded me of this documentary that I've watched called Game Changers that talked about the marketing of meat, how meat was marketed to be manly. You want to be strong, you have to eat a lot of it. So based on this, how messages are being marketed. And it's like kind of a chicken and egg shoe. As much as we want people to be more aware of ourselves and the way we speak, we also have to admit that a lot of times the majority of the population might also be very swayed by how messages are being marketed on social media platforms as well as in shopping malls.
Marketing, it's a very capitalist construct that is premised on the idea of infinite growth and we only care about profit. I think marketing is powerful. I think there is value in critiquing and thinking about how we're doing our messaging. But I think at the end of the day, marketing cannot be the only reason, because if, for example, there's profit to be found in a problematic message, or there's profit to be found in something that's very damaging, then that will become marketing, and marketing is amoral in some way. So I just want to caution against sort of seeing marketing as a be-all and end-all. Like, the climate is changing and it's really bad regardless of whether you like that message or not, and there are no pretty ways to wrap that message. And I can see why there might be resistance, right? Like the idea of things being out of control, the idea of perhaps previous ways of domination of the environment and ideas of growth being wrong. These are things that might be difficult, that are a resistance to those truths. And this has come up in climate psychology as well, is that people are most convinced by other folks who look like them. And so I think about, okay, if we're trying to change the messaging and reach out to different demographics,
the who you're appealing to, sometimes they don't need to know that our true intentions, that we want to move the climate change needle, or that we want them to save the environment or whatever it is. We have to tackle their interests. So maybe their interest is like sports or like fashion or saving money. We have to appeal to their interests and to what will engage them or get their attention first. and if they unintendedly help to save resources or move towards the direction of supporting or contributing towards climate change, I think it's already a big win for us.
Marketing is also, I think, it's really this puzzle. I mean, I think a lot of us also in this movement struggle a lot with in terms of like, oh, how do we make it like palatable? How do we massage it down so that it's accessible to people? Why are we self-censoring ourselves when there's so many other people who's going to do it for us also, I guess. Especially for our movement, given that like literally there is like not much time and there is some urgency that needs to be introduced and instilled and acknowledged also. So how do we balance this idea? We cannot be so gentle because we really don't have time, but at the same time, it has to be accessible, and I recognize that.
I think it's important to think about who's crafting our messaging and the team that's crafting our messaging, and when we do these things, we have inherent biases. Just making sure that we have a diversity of people who are crafting these messages to represent different perspectives, I think is really important. Which demographics are currently missing from our organizing spaces or our community spaces? And how can we invite people from those demographics to spread the message or help do outreach to their own communities? The environmental space in Singapore, at least in my eyes, tends to come from a certain very well educated, relatively young, upper middle class demographic. And that makes it hard to reach out to people from other spaces. And so I do think that there needs to be greater concerted effort to recruit people from other communities. And when you're doing that recruitment, you'll also figure out what are the challenges that prevent those communities from organizing with you in the first place.
I think especially to Aidan's point about finding allies from other spaces, so to identify certain people who are already on board with us in certain community groups, to influence their various community groups to come together. So that is something to think about beyond the whole gender topic that we're talking about.
I think something that's quite important to SG Climate Rally is also intersections and how undeniably, we do have class inequality in Singapore. There will be people of lower classes that will be disproportionately affected by the climate crisis. Building a coalition, garnering a broader base of support. If we actually can do the work of actually going to these communities or empowering these communities to speak up and not necessarily speaking up on behalf of them, and getting them to answer how the climate crisis will affect them, right? Or are there things that they're seeing already, and not necessarily answering for them, but having them speak will help with building a stronger coalition, with just building a broader base, which hopefully then will also help with getting our voices heard by policymakers, by the state. I think if we can articulate that this really affects everyone, and affects definitely everyone in very different ways, and in some ways quite unequal ways, then I think we will probably have a stronger movement.
The importance of collective actions through being individually aware. So you can't say, systems must change, but it definitely doesn't mean that you don't change, because systems cannot change if we don't change.
I hope that if anything, this is really just a start of having similar conversations with your friends, your families as well, and just make sure that we get this awareness a little bit higher and a little bit broader as well.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thank you everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for attending.
Bye. Have a good day. Stay safe. Stay safe.
Bye.